Hello, everyone. This is Ill-Informed Opinions. I'm Joseph Cadot. This is Fun with Cults. Today, I'm trying to get this right. Millenarianism, which is also known as millennialism, which is what I'll be calling it because it's easier to say, or Kylaism. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. All mean the same thing, and we're going to talk about what that means. And some of you may not know what those terms are, which is not unusual because those are very specific terms regarding political and religious movements and occasionally philosophies. First, my plug. These are my two novels. In the Land of Nod, which is a romance espionage story set in space, and here's Joe Herself, which is Count of Monte Cristo, set in space, except the Count's an asteroid princess. So, you know, the few people who have read them think they're fun. More popular are the anthologies I edited. This one is Beyond Steampunk. This one is about non-Victorian alternate history, using less common scenarios than you normally see for alternate history. This one is fake news. This is basically conspiracy theories as alternate history. So hopefully you guys like those, and hopefully you buy them. Let's talk about millennialism. And like I said, I'm going to use that term even though it's actually less accurate than millenarianism because it's a lot easier for me to say. So, millennialism is the belief that once certain conditions have been met, that what will happen is that some state will change dramatically. That's the simplest way to put it. In other words, it's the underpants gnome thing from the South Park, which you should watch, by the way, so it's a good understanding of how business works. Basically, you do one thing, something changes dramatically, and then either something really good happens to you or something really bad happens to your enemies, or more likely both. So, what's a good example of millennialism? Well, a good pop culture example of millennialism is zombie apocalypses. Most zombie apocalypses do not discuss how they got from a new virus is released or the gates of hell have opened or something to a world where the zombies are running rampant and there's just a few people who are standing strong against the hordes. Because, as shown in the very first, modern zombie movie, Night of the Living Dead, zombies are incredibly easy to deal with, especially if you have a government which has a police force, military, or even dogs. Just dogs alone will solve the problem. If you're ever accosted by zombies, go out on a boat. They can't swim, although they can float, but they can't swim. So, because that's a higher brain function, so you're pretty safe. Or just bring a friggin' dog. Maybe a waist-high fence, since, again, not bright. Can't get over the fence. So, with that said, in the zombie apocalypse, what makes it a millennial state, besides the fact that some magic has occurred to make the zombies somehow win over, like, everything, is that there's a small number of people who are holding their own and making life in a new, rough and wild environment, and it's all a grand adventure tinged with horror, unless you're doing The Walking Dead, in which case all the characters are dumber than the average person is by a lot, and that's the only way that story works. And frankly, I think Robert Kirkman is a hack because he keeps on repeating the same story again and again. That was good the first time, and once they got to the jail, that they should have been fine from that point on. It really took what's called the idiot ball being handled by everybody in order to make some sort of risk happen. So everybody assumes they're going to be the zombie killer, especially preppers, which are a type of cult. And millennialism is extremely tied to cults. Not all cults are millennialists, but all millennialists are cultists because they involve in a variant of cultic thinking, which is or magic thinking, where an irrational sequence of events results in an irrational result. In other words, there's no cause and effect which is directly manipulatable. I'll get deeper into that in a little bit. Now, in reality, the vast majority of people in this so-called zombie apocalypse are either dead or they are, what's the best word to put it? Oh yeah, shambling mounds of hunger. Yeah, you're either a zombie or you're dead in a zombie apocalypse. Just like prior to the Industrial Revolution, you're either in the 1% of merchant class or skilled labor class, the 0.1% of nobility, or you're a friggin' slave. You might have a different title, you know. You might be a peasant if things are going relatively well for you, and you can only be killed for specific reasons by the feudal lords. Or more likely, though, you're a serf, which means you can be killed just for the hell of it. And you likely know people who are, and probably members of your family have been. Or you're just a straight-up slave, which means that you can be bought and sold and killed for the hell of it, too. Serfs could also be bought and sold, but they were tied to the land. So the land was sold, and the serf went with the land, because the land was much more important than the serf. Anyways, and of course, when it came to war, land was much more important than peasants, as was some guy's title, whether or not he actually, earn anything from it. So, this whole thing basically boils down to there's a form of thinking where something magic happens. And I'm going to use magic specifically because there's literally nothing scientific or rational about anything which proposes millennialism. In some cases, it somewhat makes sense given the belief system. This is more true with religious. This is much more true with religious millennialism, because at the very least, a religious event doesn't have to be rational, and the return of a Messiah, if you're in the Abrahamic faith, and by that I don't just mean Christ. Well, actually I do mean Christ, because Christ just means the Anointed One or the Messiah. But I don't just mean Jesus, but I mean whoever the Messiah may be in your belief system. The return of the Messiah, or the ascendance of a Messiah, if one hasn't already shown up in your belief system, is a fundamentally irrational act caused by extra universal entities, gods, which can fundamentally change physics, at least on a local level, unless it's the big god, in which case they create physics. So, in that case, rationality goes out the window, because rationality is based on what we have observed thus far and can prove and test. That's not the case with a Messiah. It breaks all the rules. Therefore, something magic happens. Any incarnation of any god breaks all the rules by definition. It's in it's frequently laid out as a miracle occurs, because a miracle literally would have to occur in order for this stuff to work. And that's not to denigrate it from a religious or a theological perspective, because religious or theological thinking allows for miracles in a lot of theologies. Not mine specifically, but I'm unusual in that case. But if you're looking at it from a scientific perspective, or what is proposed to be a scientific or rational perspective, as we'll get into later, it's absolute bullshit. So, let's discuss some common millennialism. First off, I want to make it clear that millennialist thinking is rejected by almost all mainstream belief systems. And this is supported, if you're a Christian, in the Bible, where Jesus specifically says you'll not know the hour or the date of the return. In other words, you can't set up conditions so Jesus will return. There is a large portion of evangelical Christians, by no means all of them, who believe that, like, supporting Israel will somehow make Jesus come back. That's not true. It's literally not in the Bible. I mean, maybe it is true, but that's not in the Bible. Or getting rid of all the gays, or, any number of other things. And that's literally counter to what Jesus says. There's the same thing is true with a lot of other major belief systems. In systems like Catholicism, millennialism is a heresy and is limited to cults within the church. Just the same as, like, beating yourself up or worshiping Mary as a god are considered to be heresies. And we get the name millennialism because in the old way of numerology, 1,000 was a complete set. Okay? 1,000 was a fully complete set, like as much as you can of that set. This is why in Exodus you have thousands of people, millions of people leaving Egypt. The total, I think, is roughly like 3 million people, which is a significant amount of world population at the time. When, in fact, if you look at it based on the numerology of what they were trying to say when they were writing the thing, what it just meant was for the 1,000 people in this family, the 1,000 people in this family, that was just me saying a complete set of this family. In other words, like the immediate family, maybe some cousins, their servants, their slaves. So probably between 20 to 100 people at the outside. So definitely not 3 million in total. And that's just a matter of translation and the word drift. It's an easy mistake to make if you don't go deeper into the history of the text. And similarly, the idea of a millennium in that way takes its... it just means that after a perfect amount of time has passed, or a perfect set of events have passed, which are unknown, and that's the key, which are unknown. So, this is why, since they are essentially unknown, saying that you do know them is a heresy in most faiths. There are some faiths, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, which are cults, and in like literally every definition of the word, that have an hour and a date, and they keep on having to postpone it because it keeps on not happening. So, one of the problems is when you get to religious millennialism is that people frequently confuse apocalyptic writing for predictive writing. Apocalyptic writing, and I'll probably go into this later on in some other video. Apocalyptic writing is fundamentally writing from using metaphor and analogy to describe the political and religious state of the world as it is, and how either something is happening or there's a wish for something to happen. So that means that basically, we know who, for example, Nero Caesar. We know that the Nero Caesar was the Antichrist referred to in the Book of Revelations. That's very clear. 616, which is the real translation, or 666, which is the common translation, both refer specifically, at the time it was written, to Nero, okay, who was engaged in a huge purge of Christians and other undesirables, which resulted in mass death, incarceration, and literally people burning it like candles, to be candles. Quite famously, he did this. And we know this because a lot of people who aren't Christian and actually did not like Christians or Jews, because bear in mind at the time that St. John the Divine, not St. John the Apostle, they're two different people, was writing this, the Christians considered themselves Jews, although the Jews did not consider themselves Christians. So, these people recorded this, and even they thought that was too much, despite the fact that they didn't particularly care for, the people getting burned at the stake or slaughtered en masse. So, so you have to look at like Babylon, the seven locations are the seven hills of Rome, and that of course refers to Daniel, which talks about the end of the world, and that's referring specifically to the Babylonian exile, and which was current then. So, these things are discussions of what is happening and a hope for what could happen. They're not supposed to be taken literally. No one at the time would have taken apocalyptic text literally. To do so is to misunderstand the entire intent of the text. Again, I think I'll do a video about this because there's a whole lot of apocalypses and a whole lot of apocalyptic texts, and they're not really what they're popularly held to be. Millennialists, on the other hand, think that these apocalypses happen or will happen. And so they have specific rules they follow, so on. Similarly, as we move to other much more racist belief systems, the New Age cults believe that somehow the Age of Aquarius occurs. Originally, it was when all the Jews were gone, although not necessarily in a violent manner. Maybe just died out was supposed to be the expectation, supposedly. That's what I've heard. That's what I've read. I don't know how much that's just died out or just, had a low birth rate. So, bear in mind the progressive movement, which was home to a lot of the New Age movement as well in the early 20th century, was heavily into eugenics, so low birth rate may have been enforced by the state, and in a lot of cases it was. So once that happens, then all of a sudden we have peace and harmony and yada, yada, yada. You just have to get rid of the Jews or whoever. And again, that's the original, but the language still remains. In order to achieve the New Age, there has to be some set conditions which are not specifically related to actually, doing something practical. We can look at transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation is just a variant of spiritualism, which created New Age, and it's also a variant of the New Age. And it basically involves thinking really hard about what peace, and all of a sudden, peace breaking out. Now, let's not get into whether or not peace is a desirable state for a lot of people in the world, especially minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, and majorities in the case of women, because in a lot of cases, everything staying status quo, which is what the peace would be, is a very bad thing for them. But the idea that somehow if enough people think about peace, it'll magically happen, isn't true. Isn't true unless the number of people thinking about peace to get it happen is literally the sum total of the population of the planet. which ain't gonna happen, ever. Nor should it. And again, so we'll all live in peace and harmony in some sort of John Lennon imagined dystopia, and this will magically occur, and because everybody thought about it hard. That's unlikely. Just as unlikely as the Messiah coming back, because Jerusalem is fully restored to the to the Jewish people. Whether or not Jerusalem should be restored to the Jewish people is a huge debate, which I'm not going to get involved in. But if that ever happens, Jesus is not going to be coming back because of it. Okay? So, one of the problems with millennialism and cultic thinking in general is you take things literally that were never meant to be taken literally. We see this with and again with the New Age movement, the Mayan calendar debacle in 2012, which a large number of people, although by no means the majority, thought that the world was going to end because the Mayan calendar ended in that year. The Mayan calendar doesn't end in that year. A cycle ends and another one starts. So, hence the complete lack of flaming meteors hitting the earth at that time, and cities getting swamped and so on. Although I'm sure some city got swamped because global climate change is a thing, but that was not related. So then we get to the other equally magic thinking, although they frequently consider themselves to be less so, and they are completely wrong about this, is the political millennialism. Something magic changes. Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, which are two sides of the same coin, populist nightmare people who have no understanding of economics or science, they somehow get elected and everything's magically better. Well, we know that doesn't happen. Okay? People felt the same thing about FDR. FDR made things dramatically worse economically. This is easily provable by looking at average purchasing power and its rapid decline during the New Deal, as well as, of course, his imposition of incredibly racist laws banning black people from getting easy federal loans and segregating the military, or rather keeping it segregated, and in fact enforcing a policy of but as few winners of medals or promotions being black as possible. And of course, there's the unjust imprisonment of Japanese, Germans, and Italians during World War II. But, people thought FDR was great. Some people still do. Hi, Mark. He, despite the fact that objectively he completely wasn't. Same thing true with Andy Jackson, who people thought was going to be great and steered us into a depression, and killed a bunch of Indians, and of course was evil to black people as well. But these political figures, and I'm just speaking with American ones, aren't going to usher in a new age of harmony, peace, or whatever. And related to Trump, the racist millennialists are all a variant of this. The ones who think that if we just kill off or remove all of the X, Y, or Z, then everything's going to be better. Again, objectively, that's simply not true, and it's never happened that way, so there's no reason to assume that would happen that way, despite the fact that we've had, Woodrow Wilson, who is basically a KKK member, although not technically, in office, and again, FDR, and, Andrew Jackson, all were rampaging racists who used the power of the presidency to enforce the racism. Somehow, things didn't get better for anybody, including white people. So, and we see this again and again in ethnic cleansing wars throughout the globe as well, not just in the United States, especially not in the U.S. We have a horrifying history, but somehow it's better than Canada's even, and don't even start on Mexico. And those are just, the good guys. So, then we get to things like fascism, Marxism, objectivism, and the like, all of which are exactly the same thing from different lenses. And the people who follow these cults, and they are cults because they have no relation to reality in any way, shape, or form, stridently assert that there's a difference. Fascism is a direct response to Marxist socialism, which, by the way, is completely different than normal socialism, which is frequently practiced throughout the Western world, including the U.S. I hope you like roads and schools. It's an objectivism is just Marxism with a palette swap, just like fascism is a Marxism with a palette swap. Not to say that fascism or objectivism have socialist leanings, but it's basically the same thing for the people on the ground. Everybody's a slave except for the people at top. And somehow, these people are supposed to magically result in the people at the bottom, everything getting better. Now we know from history that's never happened, except in objectivism, because objectivism is completely unworkable even on a small scale. It's just a joke religion. And, I say it's a joke religion, and I was a Discordian for some time, until it still is to an extent. And Discordianism is literally a joke religion. Objectivism is more of a joke religion than Discordianism. And yes, you can be a Discordian Catholic, in case you're wondering. Or a Discordian anything, except objectivist, because if you're an objectivist, you're inherently an asshole, and Discordianism is about not being an asshole. So, anyways, so supposedly, to get the 1,000-year Reich, or to get the workers' paradise, the state has to dissolve, or the state has to devolve its power. One thing we know from history is the state doesn't devolve its power except through violence. It doesn't wither away. That doesn't happen. There's no reason for it to happen. If you have power, you keep it until someone who is more farsighted forces you to give it up, or B, which is what constitutions are for, right? Or B, there's a revolution which just swaps out the people, usually with someone worse. We can look at the French Revolution and see what happens when the Jacobins took over and made everything much, much worse than it was under the French monarchy. And then, of course, this concept that somehow, the state becomes unnecessary won't happen. It can't happen. Because there are always people who will not work in their own interests. And, will only work in their own interests. Will not work in their own interests. So, that's inevitable. And, because you would have to literally change human psyche for the state to wither away and us to have a fun anarchy. You literally have to change the rules, not just of economics, which are changeable because, those are human derived. They may be accurate, but they're also observed by humans. But you have to change the rule of entropy and scarcity, which cannot be changed because we live in a universe where those rules are defined specifically. So, again, a miracle occurs, and then an unattainable state results. And that's not happening. That will never happen. Okay? The miracle may occur, and an untenable state may result for a short time. There was a working anarchy in the Ukraine for like 5 minutes, actually 3 years. And of course, it collapsed immediately once someone noticed, hey, they're anarchists. We can go beat them up and no one will care and take all their stuff because that's what will happen. So, which is why Marx said it had to be a global revolution, which of course it won't be because, you know, people like things. And people like each other. Anyways, this has gone on long enough. My name is Joseph Cadot. This has been Ill-Informed Opinions. Let's see. These here are my books. If you want to buy them and support this. Or another way to support this is to basically ask questions, contact me with requests, just try to engage. I'm happy to talk to you even if you're a raving loon, which compared to me means that you have quite a stretch to go, because I can outloon all y'all. Anyways, I hope to talk to you all later. Bye-bye.